Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our SupportEd webinar, Scaffolding Distance Learning for ELLs. We are so happy that you are able to join us today, especially on a Monday morning in June. My name is Marley Zeno, and I will be presenting today's content. I'm an associate at SupportEd. Prior to working at SupportEd, I was an ELL coordinator and ENL teacher in Brooklyn, New York, working primarily with elementary school students, as well as an adjunct professor of TESOL at Hunter College in New York City. Today's session is being recorded and will be shared on the Long Island RBERN YouTube channel. Before we get started, let's take a look at our online platform, Zoom, in case anyone is not yet familiar with it. Take a moment to find your control bar, which is visible if you've downloaded Zoom. We'll be pausing for questions at the end of the webinar, and you'll use the Q&A button to ask those kinds of questions. You can enter content-related questions whenever you have one. If you happen to have any technical difficulties, please use the chat button to let us know. You can also use the chat button to connect with each other and comment on the webinar. When members of our team share information like relevant links, the message will start with 3 asterisks in the chat. The default setting for the chat in Zoom is all panelists, and we recommend that you set your chat to both panelists and attendees so that everyone can see your messages, since we'll be sharing resources throughout the webinar. Chat messages from our team, such as links or technical support, will start and end with 3 asterisks. Before we get into any content, I wanted to start by saying thank you. Everyone adapted extremely quickly to a new normal with very short notice, all while trying to take care of both yourselves and your families. And we want you to know that your students and their families appreciate everything you've done, and we appreciate all the work you've done. So thank you. If you have not already, I see a lot of us have already done this, please enter your full name and your district in the chat. And this is how your attendance will be taken so you can receive CTLE credit. Whenever you see the chat icon in the corner, we'll be sharing in the Zoom chat. Great, looks like we have teachers from all over. Great, thank you. You can keep those coming. You will receive a certificate for CTLE credits through My Learning Plan for attending the live webinar, and that will be for 1 hour of credit. We have 4 objectives for this webinar. We expect that by the end of the webinar, you will be able to describe challenges and opportunities for ELLs during distance learning, define scaffolding for ELLs, explore strategies for scaffolding distance learning tasks for ELLs, and apply a 5-step framework to scaffold content instruction for ELLs in a distance learning environment. And so today's webinar will be divided into 4 sections framed around these objectives. We've created a Padlet online resource for you as a way we can share relevant resources on supporting ELLs in distance learning. You can use the Padlet to share your own resources and comment on the topic. The Padlet will remain open indefinitely, so I encourage you to check on it periodically. We've created 1 column for each webinar in our series, and today we'll be focusing on the first column. The last column, which is also highlighted in yellow, includes an additional Padlet we created on distance learning for ELLs. And whenever you see this paper crane icon in the corner, that means that whatever is referenced on the screen is also available on the Padlet. We will also be sharing links in the chat to our distance learning resources Padlet I just mentioned, as well as our free webinar archive. So this Padlet you see on the screen, it has information on internet access for students, resources for communicating with families, translation, listening and speaking resources, virtual field trips. So we have a lot of different resources available there. So I recommend you check that out as well. And Joanna on our team has added those links to the chat. And as a reminder, all bit.ly links are case sensitive. Today we'll be drawing from Chapter 3 of Diane Stair-Fenner and Sydney Snyder's book, Unlocking English Learners' Potential. And we'll begin by discussing the challenges and opportunities that ELLs have faced during distance learning. In the chat, take a moment to share a challenge that ELLs have faced during distance learning, as well as an opportunity ELLs have had during distance learning. Learning to use computers, right? Lack of Wi-Fi technology. Resources aren't available in various languages students need. A lack of support. Right, even keyboard skills, right? I've seen that come up again and again. Right, or maybe Sarah points out maybe students have internet access, but the signal is weak and so they can't participate in online instruction or watch videos. Overwhelmed by emails. Having parents who are essential workers, absolutely. Alba noted an opportunity that smaller group instruction with the ESOL teacher that lasts longer than a typical block, right? Lack of AIS. Again, more small group instruction is an opportunity. Right, and Christine points out a lot of students have to work, right? And have chosen to work instead of their schoolwork, which is a really difficult choice to have to make. Lisa points out an opportunity of repeating screencasts to gain further understanding. Right, and if you utilize video, then students can watch it again, right? If they don't get it the first time, they can slow it down, pause. Lack of access to technology. Another opportunity, getting to know parents and families more. Text-to-speech opportunities. Time management, right? Students have gone from a highly structured environment to an environment with much less structure. Some students did excel, that's good to hear. Connection with community. Some parents have become more involved, that's great. Great, thank you for sharing all of these. You can keep them coming. Right, some parents learn more about school. Students are grateful for the help. Oh, someone noted that parent communication was at an all-time high. That's wonderful. Oh, someone noted that they miss school even more. Great, thank you all for sharing. So we definitely know that there have been lots of challenges, including lack of scaffolding for content materials, again, access to technology, financial strains, as many of you mentioned. Some students are caring for their siblings. Some students are experiencing trauma right now, maybe around housing insecurity or illness. Exposure to English, right? If some students, if they're in homes where English isn't spoken, school is where they were exposed to English. Routines, right? Around time management, some students have a hard time going from lots of routines to zero routines. And again, socio-emotional challenges. And again, you all noted opportunities as well. So it's really easy to focus on the challenges. And so it's important to take time to focus on the opportunities as well. So certain students did benefit from distance learning. Students can have time to develop the home language, more opportunities for choice in writing. Someone noted with Screencastify, you can repeat it. So students can repeat recorded directions and lessons. It's an opportunity for student choice. Several of you noted that there were more opportunities for small group instruction. And the challenge of routines and lack of routines can hopefully lead to an opportunity for independence and more time management skills. So we're also going to suggest 5 technology strategies, since technology has definitely been a strategy, even with basic typing skills. So the first strategy are internet alternatives and workarounds. So 2 come to mind. One is phone capabilities, right? You could email and text students and their families that have phones. And for families who do not read English, translated messages through various browser extensions, or I know Class Dojo translates, Talking Points translates. Paper packets are also an option. Paper packets created or compiled by the teacher is definitely better than nothing. And having them available to all students without phones or devices who come to grab and go meals has been a strategy teachers have used around the country. Or a former co-teacher of mine in Brooklyn left a basket on the steps of the school and students came and picked up materials. Other suggestions are tech buddies. So the same way we might pair students up by language with a more proficient student to support a newcomer student, you can have students support each other with technology. Since again, someone mentioned typing earlier, providing keyboard practice links, especially for little ones who may have never typed on a keyboard before and suddenly have to complete writing assignments on a keyboard, keyboard practice games can be really helpful. Clear and frequent communication, as many of you mentioned, being in touch with families as frequently as possible and as clearly as possible. And platforms to facilitate online learning. I know that different schools are using different things like Google Hangouts, Google Classroom, Canvas, which integrates Zoom, Zoom by itself, and many others, of course. Take a moment and share in the chat. If you're using a platform to facilitate online learning, please share which one in the chat. Google Classroom, lots of Google, Seesaw, Khan Academy, typing.com practice. Thank you, Jolene. Edpuzzle, Flipgrid, Seesaw, Google Docs, right? Google Docs is a great opportunity for collaboration. Oh, I've seen Microsoft Teams as well. Schoology. Right, so a lot of us are using Google as well as other materials that are available to us. BrainPop, I'm a big fan of BrainPop personally. Newsela, ReadWorks, Learning.com, Pear Deck, Vocabulary, IXL, Epic, Quizlet. If you aren't looking at the chat, I definitely suggest checking out the other resources people are sharing in the chat. Thank you. So this graphic on synchronous and asynchronous learning is on our Padlet, and it defines these two types of cyber environments for ELLs at a glance and shares both advantages and disadvantages for ELLs in each type of cyber learning. So I recommend checking that out on our Padlet as well. So now that we've talked about challenges and opportunities, we will define scaffolding for ELLs. So in the chat, please share, what are scaffolds and what are they intended to do? What are scaffolds and what are they intended to do? Provide support with learning, provide an equal learning environment, support students with access to learning, someone know their temporary supports. Right, I'm seeing temporary multiple times, making content more accessible, modifications to grade level material to make learning more accessible. Remove when not needed. Meeting students at their level. Personalized, extra support to meet the same goal, right? Intended to make students successful with their tasks. Great. These are all great responses. And again, here's this visual of scaffolding to show that these supports on this building, they won't be there forever. They're to support the building while it grows. Right, so as everyone said, scaffolds are temporary supports. They support students performing a task they could not do without help, and it facilitates students completing tasks independently in the future. And when considering the use of scaffolds for ELLs, it's important to remember that they are temporary and that they're not meant to be a permanent support. So the ultimate goal of scaffolds is to facilitate a student completing the same task that everyone else is doing independently in the future once they acquire more language and skill that they need for that task. So why do we use scaffolds with ELLs? Why is it important? Because of the support they provide, scaffolds can help make rigorous grade level curriculum accessible to all students by providing what Krashen referred to as comprehensible input. Academic texts and concepts can be broken down into meaningful pieces and be presented with key instructional supports in order to support ELLs' understanding of and engagement with content. Scaffolds also provide opportunities to model language, such as when students work in pairs or small groups with non-ELLs, or through the use of sentence stems and frames. When using scaffolds, it's important to recognize that they are not one size fits all, and they should be provided to ELLs based on each student's English proficiency level, home language literacy, and other needs. So on the Padlet, we have a scaffolding for ELLs self-assessment. So I recommend that at some point after the webinar, you check this out. And it's also something you can share with your colleagues, and it will help you determine scaffolds that you are familiar with and ones you might be interested in learning more about. So this is a great thing to look at with a co-teacher and figure out which scaffolds as a team you know, which one of you might be stronger in than the other, and places that you might want to explore. And here's where this is on the Padlet under Scaffolding Distance Learning for ELLs. So in the chat, please share a scaffold you use regularly that works well with ELLs. What is a scaffold you use regularly with ELLs? Word walls, sentence frames, graphic organizers, visuals, word webs, word banks, flowcharts, think maps, one-on-one instruction, anchor charts, Frayer models. A lot of visuals, a lot of adapting texts, pairing students with a support, translated vocabulary, realia. Ooh, enabled drawing as a response, right? Multiple ways of responding to prompts, picture glossaries, front-loading vocabulary, great graphic organizers and manipulatives, more word banks, small groups, pre-taught vocabulary, unpacking those difficult, juicy sentences, allowing verbal responses for content quizzes. That's a great scaffold. Awesome. These are great ideas. Thank you. So next, we'll explore some specific scaffolds. And a lot of you have mentioned these already, so we'll go into them in more detail. Based on the work of the WIDA Consortium, we group scaffolds into 3 categories: instruction or instructional practices, materials and student groups, and we'll be exploring each of these on the oncoming slides. So it's important to note that depending on the task and a student's language proficiency level, ELLs may need 1 or more scaffolds in each of the 3 categories to complete a specific task. So as you know your students best, and so what they need will depend on the task. Sometimes even it depends on the day for specific students. So depending on what you know they need, you'll choose your scaffolds accordingly. So here are the 3 categories of scaffolds that we've mentioned with examples listed for each. So these are, almost all of these, I believe, have been mentioned in the chat already. So for materials and resources, we have graphic organizers, bilingual glossaries and dictionaries, home language materials, sentence frames, sentence stems and paragraph frames, visuals, word banks and word walls. Under instruction, we have pre-identified and pre-taught vocabulary, which has been mentioned, concise instruction of background knowledge, a reduced linguistic load, repetition, paraphrasing, and modeling. And for student grouping, we have structured pair work, structured small group work, and teacher-led small group work. So now we will do a poll. Which category of scaffolds do you use the most with ELLs during distance learning? Materials and resources, instruction, or student grouping? And so we'll leave this open for a minute so everyone can respond. I see people are responding in the chat as well as through the poll. And a lot of people are saying that you use materials and resources. So about 80% of people have voted. We'll give it another moment. right? So you can see almost 75% of respondents are using scaffolded materials and resources the most, which makes a lot of sense. With instruction, if you're not with students directly, materials and resources make sense as the go-to for distance learning. Thank you. So reflecting on these categories of scaffolds, please share in the chat any implications you see in scaffolding distance learning work for ELLs. So what do these 3 categories make you think of for scaffolding distance learning for ELLs? Right, differentiation, absolutely. Stephanie noted that student grouping make it tricky. Creativity with scheduling for synchronous learning. It can be hard to use a lot of these with distance learning. Using breakout rooms, absolutely. Planning with co-teachers. Perhaps a lack of hands-on materials. Microsoft Teams also has a function like breakout rooms. Right, the difficulty of not having in-person one-on-one instruction. And someone mentioned siloing. That's a really interesting point, that students are logging in with mainstream teachers when there's no ENL co-teacher. And so that collaboration around scaffolding is harder during distance learning, absolutely. Right, with little ones especially, technology can be a real issue. Consistent participation. Donna noted that assessment is very difficult, absolutely. Catherine noted that it would be helpful to work as a team, absolutely. Which is also harder, right? It's harder for your students to work together, and it's also harder to work with your co-teachers when you're not in the same space. Socio-emotional learning needs, absolutely. Thank you all for sharing. So we're going to go into more examples in more detail and show you how some can be adapted for distance learning. So the first category of scaffolds, the material scaffolds examples, include things that you develop to support ELLs engagement and understanding. And some examples of these materials, like many of you mentioned, graphic organizers, visuals, word banks, word walls, supporting text or materials in home language, absolutely. So these are scaffolds you are all very clearly familiar with, and we'll show some more distance learning examples. So we've got examples of word banks that offer vocabulary to support ELLs in completing particular tasks. So for example, students may use a word bank to complete sentence frames about a text, and they may also use a word bank in responding orally to questions. So in this example, you can see that students can use a word bank of key vocabulary to complete a paragraph about the New England colonies. Word walls are most often seen at the elementary level, but they can also provide support at upper grade levels as well. At the elementary level, word walls include sight words, high frequency words, and words that do not follow standard spelling patterns for students to use when writing. Word walls can also be developed for unit vocabulary. For upper grade ELLs, word walls might include academic words, transition and signal words for writing, and content words for the current units of study. At all levels, students and teachers often co-create the wall, and word walls include visuals and translations of words in students' home languages. So this is an example of a word wall that was created in Google Docs, and this is something that students could collaborate on, or something a teacher could create for a student and share. So this is an example of something that's normally in the physical classroom that can also be used digitally. We also have, as many of you mentioned, paragraph frames, which can provide a varying amount of support, but usually include the language for organizing a paragraph, right? First, then, in conclusion. So depending on your student's needs, you would either dial the scaffolding up or down, and throughout a unit, perhaps you might gradually decrease the amount of language provided. So in this example, you can see that the teacher has provided clues as to what the students need to do in completing the frame. For example, it tells students to insert literary devices. And again, the idea is that as students gain familiarity with the structure and language used in constructing a paragraph, they will need less support. So another example of an online scaffolding tool is No Red Ink. And if anyone has used it, please chime in the chat and let us know. So it includes free writing topics, mini tutorials on different topics, and scaffolded guided writing templates. So yes, I can see that Jacqueline has used it. Barbara likes their journal entries. So some of us have heard of it but never used it. So definitely something to check out and add to your toolbox. noredink.com. And someone asked in the chat, I don't want to breeze past it, if you would create the virtual word wall in Google Docs and share with students. And I would say yes, absolutely. Or depending on the purpose of the word wall, it's something you could co-create with students or have students work on together. Great. So another example of a scaffold that can be adapted for distance learning is a bilingual glossary. And this is a support that could also be made in Google Docs. It includes the word and a translation, the English definition, an example from the text, and a picture or phrase that represents the word and whether or not the word is a cognate. And thank you. Joanna has shared the link to No Red Ink in the chat. So another example of a material scaffold is supporting texts in the home language. So research has shown again and again the benefit of providing ELLs who are fluent in their home language with supporting materials in that language. And teachers can provide these types of resources even when they do not speak the student's home language. So you can provide ELLs with books, articles, or website that support their understanding of a particular content area. And teachers can also work with a native speaker of the student's home language to develop a bilingual glossary or short text to provide background knowledge. It can also benefit ELLs with lower proficiency levels to demonstrate understanding of content in their home language. So two great digital resources are the International Children's Digital Library website, which has a selection of digital books in 59 languages. And it's a great way also for students to explore books around the world. And Unite for Literacy has texts in Spanish, and they also include a read aloud function. They are free, and they are linked on the Padlet. ReadWorks as well has multiple languages. Newsela is available in Spanish. Khan Academy is available in at least 10 languages. So even when you're not with students, home language supports are a great scaffold to offer. So examples of instruction scaffolds. This includes pre-identified and pre-taught vocabulary, as people mentioned, concise instruction of background knowledge, modeling, repetition, and paraphrasing. These are the scaffolds that you provide as the teacher through your own teaching. And these are things you do all the time as a teacher without realizing or naming, oh, I'm providing an instructional scaffold right now, but it's something you do naturally all the time. And these are the ones that can be tricky with distance learning since you're not physically with students, but there are still ways that you can provide these with distance learning. So this example is a concise instruction of background knowledge. So while providing essential background knowledge is important to ELLs engagement and understanding, we don't want to provide too much to the point where we overwhelm students. So we want to focus on background knowledge that is essential to ELLs understanding of learning. You don't want to pre-teach information that students can learn from the text or task itself. And you also don't want to spend more time focusing on the background knowledge than you do on the new content. And it can be really hard to choose what to focus on, but we want to make sure we're being really intentional with the background knowledge we teach. So this is an example of background on the Mississippi River for a text students will read about a man who helped clean up the Mississippi River. A short text was developed to provide the information. You can see it has bolded words, all of which are in a glossary. It also includes a visual, and maybe you want to highlight for students, where we are on this map so students have a sense of where they are in relation to the Mississippi River. So something like this can be done either as a do now or as homework to provide that concise background knowledge. Modeling is an essential scaffold for ELLs that many of you have already mentioned. It involves the teacher or another student demonstrating a new concept or approach to learning and the student learning by observing. So you can model as a teacher behaviors, language, thinking, or steps to an activity. This checklist provides an example of strategies that can be modeled for students. Students can use the checklist to listen for other students using specific strategies for recognizing when they need to use a particular strategy. So before introducing a checklist like this, we would want to present each strategy independently, along with opportunities for students to practice. So you might begin with predicting before you move on to questioning, visualizing, and the rest. And for distance learning, you can record video or audio of a think aloud to model for students. So even when you're apart, you can model through audio or video. The third category of scaffolds are student grouping. And like many of you have mentioned, this involves structured pair work, small group work, and teacher-led small group work. Student grouping is the most challenging type of scaffold to use during virtual learning. So we've got some possible ideas for you. It can include shared writing documents in Google Docs, as someone mentioned earlier, pair assignments for older students, more independent students who can handle setting up a Google Meet with another student, small group meetings with teachers. I know teachers in Brooklyn who are holding office hours for their students, using breakout rooms, as people mentioned, in either Teams or Zoom, recording responses and commenting on each other's responses with a program like Flipgrid. And a non-technology example could be pen pals. So it's something we have to get more creative with, but it is still possible to use student grouping as a scaffold in distance learning. So in the chat, please share what strategies or tools you use or would like to use to support student collaboration during distance learning. Since this is a difficult one, let's share our ideas in the chat. I see Flipgrid, Google Meet, Google Docs. Zoom, Padlet. With a free account for Padlet, you can make up to 6. Edpuzzle, Nearpod, Google Sheets, MS Teams. Someone mentioned wanting to learn more about tech resources. I do recommend checking out our Padlet that's specific to distance learning. And Joanna shared that link earlier in the chat, and we have a bunch of programs there listed for you. And many of them were free through the end of the school year, but I do recommend, sometimes if you just reach out to companies personally, they will extend free access. And as distance learning may or may not be continuing in one form or another, companies will hopefully extend their free trials of products. ReadWorks, Screencastify, anything to promote collaboration and socialization. Absolutely. Thank you. And as you can see, your colleagues are a great resource, so definitely check out the chat. So now that we've explored these categories of scaffolds, we'll share strategies for planning scaffolded lessons for ELLs. So we'll go into each of these steps in greater detail, and these steps are, number 1, to scaffold a lesson, you have to know your ELLs. 2, we need to identify the language or skills that students will need in the lesson. 3, we'll have to plan the lesson. 4, we have to select and develop appropriate materials. And 5, teach the lesson, adapting scaffolding and materials as needed. So we have a tool for each of these steps on the Padlet. So the step 1 tool, know your ELLs. With this tool, you would select a particular ELL that you're teaching, use this form available on the Padlet to gather information on the student, and share the information with a colleague. Especially with distance learning, when you can't just pass someone in the hallway and mention, oh, by the way, the student's reading level is M. It's important to be intentional about sharing information with colleagues when you don't have that incidental interaction. And if you're the ENL teacher, you're potentially the expert on that student. So making sure we know our students, can they read and write in their home language? What is their home language? What was their educational experience like before they came to your school? What are their latest NICESLAT scores? This is all information we need when scaffolding appropriately for students. The second step to developing scaffolded lessons is to analyze the language demands of the academic task and texts you're planning to include in your lesson. So identify areas where ELLs might need explicit background knowledge instruction. Consider the language demands for students in terms of vocabulary, what's difficult at the sentence level, what's difficult at the discourse level. So in other words, what vocabulary might be challenging for ELLs, what sentences might be confusing or difficult to deconstruct, and what about the text or activity may be challenging for ELLs. So anticipating those challenges in advance so we can plan ahead to support students. And again, we have another tool for that on our Padlet, a checklist for increasing academic language awareness. And again, this is something I recommend you share with colleagues. For planning the lesson, we've also provided a tool for once you've analyzed your lesson to identify the challenges for ELLs, you can begin to plan the scaffolds that you'll use to meet ELLs needs. So we've recommended scaffolds at beginning, intermediate, and advanced English language proficiency levels, as well as scaffolds for all levels. And this is a good chart to keep in your back pocket, to share with colleagues. For step 4, selecting and developing materials, we've added another tool for you that's got 2 checklists for choosing materials for ELLs and for, once you've chosen them, adapting them. And I know these are a lot of tools at once, but we wanted to make all of them available to you. And the final step, after you've done all of these other steps, is to teach the lesson. And tool 5 that we have here is a checklist that you can use to make sure you've completed all these steps in planning a scaffolded lesson. And this isn't, I'm not suggesting that every single lesson you teach, you do this every single day, but it is a good refresher for the steps we want to take to appropriately scaffold materials for our students. So we'll do another poll. Of these 5 scaffolding tools, which would you like to try for future distance learning? What I know about my ELL, language demand analysis checklist, scaffolds by proficiency level, material selection and adaptation, and the scaffolding checklist. And again, all of these tools are available to you on the Padlet to download, to share. And we will be posting these slides for the presentation on the Padlet once we've finished. So if there's anything you want to go back and look at, that will be available to you. So it looks like every tool has someone who wants to explore it more. And a lot of us are interested in the scaffolds by proficiency level. Great, thank you. So some more considerations for scaffolding for ELLs during distance learning. We've got some do's and don'ts. We do want to make it student driven and provide student choice in independent activities as much as we can. And we don't want to just use all of our regular stuff and cross our fingers and hope it works for distance learning. And we also don't want to make perfect the enemy of the good. This is something none of us have done before. So we want to make sure that we know that our best is good enough for our students right now, and that we don't spend so much time hoping that it's perfect that it gets in our way of doing what's good for our students. Here's an example out of a district in Pennsylvania, a distance learning task that integrates several scaffolds from the list. So you can see we've got home language support, links to audio instructions, a video to build background knowledge, sentence frames. So here's an example of, you can see how one distance learning task incorporated 4 different scaffolds. Another example out of a district in Virginia, this is all the work for the week posted with clear directions and a video voiceover of the directions with subtitles in English. I'm a big fan of closed captioning in Khan Academy, in BrainPop. Anywhere, any YouTube video for the most part, you can check to see if there's closed captioning. And all the work here is due on the following Monday. So this is a nice way for students to learn how to plan ahead for the week, is when they know at the beginning everything they have to do for the week. So we're going to look at this task quickly and note what challenges you see with this task. So this is a distance learning task that's been sent home for ELLs. What challenges do you see? Right off the bat, it's too many words. Very, very wordy. A lot of text, right? It's not colorful, it's small print, not enough visuals, no workspace, a lot to decode. Can parents read in their home language? Can parents read English? Overwhelming, busy, absolutely. So even though we've got Spanish on this side and English on this side, it's still so much text. So the potential challenges here, right? Caregiver literacy and math knowledge, access to all these household objects that students will need, jars, pennies, salt, sand, a cookie sheet. Students would need background in numbers through 24, basic place value, addition and subtraction with and without regrouping, and it requires an adult to help. So after we've gone through lots of examples, we've gone through all these steps for scaffolding distance learning, some examples of do's and don'ts. In the chat, quickly share any new scaffolds you'd like to try and any reflections on scaffolding distance learning for ELLs. People appreciated the example that showed the 4 scaffolds integrated into one piece, developing a language lens to see where students may need help. Someone mentioned that YouTube has a lot of resources for early learners, especially pen pals. Great, keep the reflections coming. We also want to share with you, we've created a lesson planning template for distance learning that includes the steps that we've mentioned, steps 1 through 5, and then synthesizes them all together in one place. And this is something that's available to you on Padlet, and we encourage you to check it out and share it with your friends. And again, this tool is on the Padlet under Scaffolding Distance Learning for ELLs. So we have a few moments for Q&A. And keep in mind, if we don't have time to answer every question, my email will be up at the end of the presentation, and you can email me any questions. So someone asked what age group No Red Ink is intended for. I believe it's, I would say upper elementary to high school, but they do have a range of activities available. And we will, someone asked for the Padlet link again, we will reshare that. There is no sign-in for today, that's a good question, but if you haven't already, please enter your full name and your district, since that's how your attendance will be taken. Okay, and someone has mentioned that a desire for more technology or platform-specific PD. A lot of sites have their own tutorials on them. I know that New York State TESOL has a lot of great technology tutorials on their YouTube page. What does it mean to identify what is needed at the discourse level? So discourse, a good example of discourse is a biology textbook is written using different language than you would speak to a friend in. So discourse gets at genre of language. A play looks different than a math problem. So it's at the if we're looking at it in sort of concentric circles with vocabulary in the center and then sentence, discourse is broader than sentence level, and it's these more invisible markers of language and appropriateness and genre. So taking into account, if a student has never read a play before, how am I supporting students in accessing this kind of language? Okay, how do we update Padlet information? I'm not quite sure what that question means, so feel free to chat me privately. Oh, what was the name of the book that we shared at the beginning? We can share the link to that again. Unlocking English Learners' Potential by Diane Stair-Fenner and Sydney Snyder is a great resource for teaching ELLs, and we'll share the link to that again. Joanna has shared it in the chat. Thank you. And I'm aware that we are close to 10 o'clock and I don't want to keep anybody. So if you have any questions that we didn't have a chance to answer, please email me personally and I will put it up at the end of the presentation so you will see my email. Again, I hope you feel that we met our objectives for the day. You will receive a certificate of completion. Again, if you haven't already, please enter your full name and your district, and you will receive that through My Learning Plan. We have 3 more webinars coming up, one on engaging ELLs in authentic online language instruction, serving SIFE through distance learning, and supporting ELLs socio-emotionally. And again, here's my email. It is marley@getsupported.net. We appreciate you so much. Thank you for joining us today and exploring scaffolding. Again, my name is Marley Zeno, and it's been my pleasure to share these resources and strategies with you today. And thank you again for all the work that you're doing to support students through uncertain times. You can contact us and connect with our team on Twitter or Facebook to continue conversations critical to the success of ELLs. And again, if you have any unanswered questions, please feel free to email me. I hope everyone has a great week. Thank you. Thank you again and have a great week.